Welcome to Lento English. Ready to level up your English? Here we learn through stories, slow, clear, and fun. Listen, relax, and enjoy the journey.
1. Introduction. The United States was in its second term with President Trump. Many things were happening in the country. People had different ideas about the future. Life went on, but sometimes there were big political talks in Washington, D.C. These talks could affect everyone. One big talk started again. It was about money for the government. The White House and Congress needed to agree on a new budget. This budget decides how much money different government parts will get. If they do not agree, there can be problems. This time, the disagreement was serious. The president wanted money for certain projects. Members of Congress had other ideas. They wanted to spend money in different ways. Both sides tried to get what they wanted. It was a difficult discussion. Time was passing quickly. There was a date when the old budget would stop. This date was very important. It was the deadline to fund the government. If no new budget was agreed by this date, the government could stop working. This is called a government shutdown. Many people started to feel worried. Federal workers across the country watched the news closely. These workers included people who cleaned offices, park rangers, and people who checked flights at airports. They wondered if they would still have their jobs and get paid. Citizens also paid attention. They thought about how a shutdown could change their daily lives. Would national parks close? Would some government services stop? Everyone waited to see what the leaders would do. The deadline was getting nearer and nearer. It was a time of uncertainty for many in the nation. People hoped for an agreement, but the future was unclear. 2. The government closes. The important day came. It was the deadline for leaders to agree on money for the government. Many people waited, hoping for a good outcome. But the discussions between the White House and Congress did not end well. They could not agree on how to fund the government. Because there was no deal, the government officially closed. This happened on the last day of September. Many parts of the federal government stopped working. This was a government shutdown, a time when non-essential government operations paused. Thousands of federal workers were told to go home. They were called furloughed employees. These people could not go to their offices or do their jobs. They were not allowed to work, and they would not receive their regular pay. Imagine going to work one day and the next, your office is closed and your income stops. Their absence meant many important tasks were left undone, affecting many areas of public life. However, some workers had to continue their jobs. These were essential workers. They worked in areas vital for public safety and national security. For example, airport security staff kept working to ensure flights were safe. Border Patrol agents stayed on duty to protect the country's borders. People who helped distribute food aid to low-income families also continued their service, as this was a critical need. But even for these essential workers, the situation was difficult. They worked every day without knowing when their next paycheck would arrive. This caused much stress and worry for them and their families. The shutdown also meant that many federal places closed their doors to the public. National parks, popular for outdoor activities and tourism, were no longer open. Visitors found gates locked and signs saying closed. This disappointed many families. Federal offices across the country also stopped offering services. People could not apply for new passports, get help with taxes, or access other government programs they relied on. This made daily life harder for many citizens. Services like air travel faced big challenges. Even though essential staff were working, fewer people were available. This led to longer lines at airports and delays for travelers, causing frustration. Food aid programs, which help many poor families, also felt the strain. People worried if they would get the help they needed to feed their children, adding to their daily struggles. The effects of the government closing were clear and widespread. It was not just a political problem discussed in Washington, D.C. It touched the lives of millions of people directly. Everyone felt the uncertainty and wished for a quick end. They hoped that leaders would quickly find a way to open the government again. The shutdown showed how much people depend on government services for everyday life and how quickly problems can arise when those services stop. 3. People face problems. Federal workers across the country faced a difficult time. Many employees were told to stay home because their agencies were closed. They were not paid for their work during this period. This meant thousands of families suddenly had no regular income. They worried about how to pay for food, rent, and other important bills like electricity. Some workers had to use their savings. Others borrowed money from friends or family. It was a very uncertain and stressful situation for countless people. Even those federal workers who were called essential faced similar problems. These workers, like airport security staff or air traffic controllers, still had to come to work every day. They performed their important duties, keeping the country safe and running. But they also did not receive their regular paychecks on time. They worked without knowing when they would get their money. This put a big strain on their personal lives and added stress to their demanding jobs. The shutdown changed daily life for many Americans, not just federal workers. Services that people used every day were affected. For example, travel became harder and more frustrating. At busy airports, security lines became very long. This was because many security officers were working without pay and fewer officers were available. Travelers waited for hours, sometimes missing connecting flights. This clearly showed how the government shutdown reached into many parts of people's daily lives. Other important programs also faced problems, causing concern for vulnerable groups. Food aid for low-income families was at risk of running out. Many poor families depend on this help to buy healthy food for their children. The uncertainty about this aid caused great worry for parents. National parks, popular places for recreation, were closed to the public. People could not visit these natural areas. This also affected small businesses near the parks, like hotels and restaurants. The economic impact grew each day the government remained closed. Families with no paychecks had much less money to spend. This meant local stores, restaurants, and small businesses lost customers and sales. A restaurant near a federal office building might see fewer people coming for lunch. A small shop near a national park might have almost no sales. These businesses struggled to pay their own employees and their rent. Some even had to close temporarily. The problems caused by the shutdown were real and deeply personal for many. People felt the pain and disruption in their daily lives. They worried about their homes, putting food on the table, and their jobs. The longer the shutdown lasted, the deeper these problems became for millions of Americans. It showed how much people rely on the government to work smoothly. The entire country felt the weight of the political disagreement. Everyone hoped for a solution soon. 4. The country reacts. The country watched closely as the government shutdown continued for many days. News channels reported on the situation day and night without stopping. Television screens showed constant updates and special reports. Reporters stood outside closed federal buildings, showing empty offices. They interviewed people who were affected, like airport workers who were not getting paid or small business owners losing money. Radio stations played discussions about the shutdown for many hours each day. Online news sites published new stories and articles every minute. Social media platforms were filled with debates, personal stories, and opinions. It was nearly impossible to turn on the television or radio without hearing about the government shutdown. Every part of the country received constant information about the problems it caused. Because of this constant news, people across the nation had many different opinions. They talked a lot about who was truly responsible for the big problem. Some citizens believed President Trump was right to stand firm. They thought he was fighting for important national needs like border security. These people supported his demands for a new budget, even if it meant a long shutdown. They felt he should not change his mind. However, many others strongly disagreed with the president. They believed he was causing too much trouble for ordinary Americans. They felt he should compromise with Congress to end the shutdown quickly and get people back to work. At the same time, many people blamed leaders in Congress. Some said that the Democrats were not willing to work with the president. They believed the Democrats should have found a way to make a deal sooner. Other people strongly supported Congress. They felt that Congress was protecting important government programs and the rights of the people. They believed Congress was right to not give in to the president's demands. This made the shutdown the main topic of conversation everywhere. Families talked about it at dinner tables. Friends discussed it at coffee shops and at work. People shared their worries and ideas in stores and at public gatherings. It was the most important thing people talked about in their daily lives. Experts in economics also spoke about the shutdown. They explained the negative effects on the national economy in easy-to-understand ways. They said that many government workers were not receiving their regular paychecks. This meant these workers had much less money to spend on food, rent, and other necessary things. Less spending by many people hurt local businesses, like restaurants, shops, and service providers. The experts warned that the shutdown could slow down the country's economic growth. They also talked about how important government services were affected. For example, some airport security lines became longer, and food aid programs for poor families faced problems. The experts worried about the long-term damage to the nation's finances and the public's trust in the government. The longer the shutdown lasted, the bigger the problems became for everyone in the country. 5. The leaders talk. President Trump often spoke to the country. He used social media and gave speeches to explain his view. He told people why he would not change his mind about the budget. He said the new budget needed to include money for his main plans. He believed this was important for the country's safety and future. He often repeated his strong position to the public. At the same time, leaders in Congress held many meetings. These meetings were often long and difficult. Democrats and Republicans sat down together. They tried to find a way to end the government shutdown. They wanted to agree on a new budget to open the government again. But both sides had very strong ideas and demands about the budget. The president and Republicans in Congress asked for specific things. They wanted funds for their main project to be part of any new budget. They did not want to give up on this demand. They said it was a promise they had made to the people. Democrats, however, had different demands. They wanted to protect other government programs. They also wanted to make sure federal workers would get their pay quickly. The talks were not easy. Each side held firm to its position. Sometimes it seemed like there was no way forward at all. The leaders talked for many hours over several days. They went back and forth with different ideas and proposals, but no agreement came quickly. There was little movement or change from either side. During this time, President Trump did not push his party to compromise much. He kept his hard line. He continued with other presidential duties. He traveled to other countries for important meetings. He also spent time at his private homes. This showed that he was not ready to change his mind easily. Republicans in the Senate largely supported his position. They did not budge from their demands. Some Democrats felt that the talks were not working. They saw little hope of making real progress with Republicans. One independent senator, who often voted with Democrats, said the strategy was not effective. Another Democratic senator said there was only one type of deal possible. This meant that other options were not on the table. The long days of talks did not bring a quick end to the shutdown. The country watched as leaders struggled to find common ground. The negotiations were indeed difficult and progress was very slow. 6. A way out is hard. The government shutdown continued for many days, stretching into weeks. Leaders from both political parties worked to find a way to end it. They presented several ideas, hoping to make a deal. But each time these proposals failed. One side would not agree to what the other side wanted. It was very hard to find common ground. Every new plan met with strong opposition. The talks in Washington grew more difficult. Democrats and Republicans had strong and different ideas. Democrats wanted to protect important government programs. They worried about cuts to health care and help for low-income families. Some Democrats felt this shutdown was a critical moment. They believed they needed to stand firm and not give in to the president's demands without big changes. They saw it as a chance to draw a line. Republicans, on the other hand, also held a firm position. The president did not want to change his mind on his key demands. He believed his plan was essential for the country. Many Republicans in Congress supported him fully. They thought it was important to stick together and show strength. This strong stance from both sides made it hard for new ideas to pass. Each day, the arguments between the two parties grew stronger and more public. It was not just about money, it was about who would win. People across the country watched the news with growing concern. They felt the problems of the shutdown more each day. Hundreds of thousands of federal workers were not getting paid. Many national parks and federal offices stayed closed. Important government services became slower. The public started to get very worried and angry. They put more pressure on their leaders to find a solution. Letters and phone calls flooded Congress every day. People wanted their government to work again. But despite the growing problems and the public's cries for help, a way out seemed far away. Many people started to think the shutdown would last for a very long time. It felt like no one could agree and the country was stuck. The leaders continued to talk, but no real progress was made. Every new idea failed to bring the two sides closer. Hope for a quick end became smaller as the days passed. The disagreements between the parties seemed too wide and too deep to cross. 7. Finding a solution. A new idea for ending the government shutdown began to take shape. After many weeks of disagreement, some leaders started to talk about a different kind of plan. This plan was not perfect for anyone, but it offered a way forward. It was a compromise, meaning both sides would give up something to get something else. The long shutdown had caused too many problems for people across the country. People were tired of the uncertainty and the daily difficulties. They wanted a resolution. Leaders in Congress and the White House looked closely at this new proposal. It suggested reopening the government for a short time. This short-term deal would fund government operations until the end of January. This would allow federal workers to return to their jobs and essential services to restart. It would also give leaders more time to discuss a longer-term budget plan without the pressure of a full shutdown. Many believed this was the only way to move past the current problem and ease the public's worries. After careful consideration, enough leaders from both political parties agreed to support this temporary solution. They understood that the pain caused by the shutdown had become too great for many American families. The next step was a vote in the Senate and the House of Representatives. People watched the news with hope. They wanted the shutdown to end and for life to return to normal. The pressure from the public was very strong. The votes were cast. A majority of leaders supported the new plan. It was a bipartisan vote, meaning members from both major parties voted for it. Soon after the vote, a big announcement was made. The government shutdown was officially over. This news brought a wave of relief across the nation. It had been the longest shutdown in the country's history. The news spread quickly. Federal employees who had been told to stay home could now go back to work. They would receive their paychecks, including money for the time they had not worked. National parks, which had been closed, would open their gates again to visitors. Important services like food aid for low-income families would resume. Air travel, which had faced delays, would slowly return to normal. The difficulties that many Americans faced because of the shutdown were coming to an end. It was a moment of relief for millions of people and a chance for the country to begin healing. 8. The lesson learned. The government was open again. Federal employees returned to their jobs and offices. Many felt relief, happy to receive their paychecks, including money for all days they did not work. Essential workers also got their back pay. Slowly, the country began to recover. things started to feel normal. Air travel became easier. Food aid for low-income families started. National parks, which had been closed, welcomed visitors again. Many problems from the shutdown began to fade. Families breathed easier. Small businesses that struggled hoped for better days. However, political feelings from the long shutdown did not disappear. People thought about why it happened. They considered the difficult talks between leaders. Some felt the deal to end the shutdown was not strong enough. For example, some Democrats were not happy. They believed it was a chance to make big changes or set new limits on the president's power. They felt this opportunity was lost. They were angry that the government reopened without these changes. Other Democrats thought the shutdown's pain was too much, believing it important to open the government quickly. This showed different opinions within the party. The president, on the other hand, held a strong position. He did not change his mind much during the 40 days. In the end, he gave up very little to get the government open. Many thought his firm stand had worked for him. This made some feel that such tactics might be used again. The agreement that ended the shutdown was only for a short time, until the end of January. This worried many. The same political problems causing the shutdown were still present. People asked, could this happen again soon? How could the country stop another shutdown? The long shutdown was a difficult lesson. It showed how political disagreements could hurt many.